I had the privilege of sitting down with Dr. Marc Harrison, President and CEO of Intermountain Healthcare, and a pediatric critical care physician with a proven track record as a top operations executive on a global scale. He is a national and international thought leader on transformation and innovation, ranking in Fortune magazine's top 50 world's greatest leaders in 2019, 2020, and 2021. He also ranked third among modern healthcare's 100 most influential people in healthcare in 2020. Without further ado, let's go to Intermountain's Innovation Center in Salt Lake City.
So I'm lucky to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you for hosting me.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for coming out.
It's been an amazing couple of days. It's a beautiful place that you live in. Thank you. So I want to start with something personal. We were all saddened to hear of your diagnosis of multiple myeloma, and we all want to know that you're okay. How are things going?
Well, first of all, don't feel sad. Everyone's got something. So I am not special in any way. And some people's problems you can see on the outside, some are on the inside. No family is untouched by challenge. Yeah. We're good. Fortunately, on a health standpoint, I'm on a really good place. I'm in a good place right now, and so it's no fun having an incurable disease. Yeah. But by the same token, I'm really fortunate that a phase 2 trial has me in complete remission, have been in remission for 18 months. I'm going to touch wood that it continues for a while longer. And, this sharpens your desire, our desire, my desire to live intentionally. And I don't think I waste a day in terms of having fun, making sure my relationships are good, and hopefully making a difference.
One of the differences that I know you're focused on making is tied up with your love of Ironman as well. So not only are you in remission, but you are busily training, I think, for the ride to Kona. Tell us about, why that matters to you and how it is a personal thing.
So there are definitely personal and professional components to this. Sport has been part of my life forever, and my best friends, long-term friends, are people that I've trained with and raced with and enjoyed bike rides and trail runs and that sort of thing. Yeah. And it really, this quest, this road to Kona, it's about being alive. Mm. So I never want to just exist, and I never have. And the idea of taking something that's really important to me, for me, it's family, work, and sport are the things that give me great pleasure. And I just wanted to live. And so I've done 7 Ironman distance races, but I've never been to Kona. And I say, this is the year. Yeah. And then what can we do with it? And working with Dave Flood and his team and our marketing and communications group, which is spectacular as well. Yeah. It's like, how can we both tell a story around wellness, around overcoming some adversity, which is real. This is, there's never been a person who's been through what I've been through who's doing what I've done, and raise some money for a really good cause. And in this case, it's around kids. So I'm really excited. Unfortunately, Kona was COVIDed out this year. Yeah. I was ready to rock and roll. I managed to do a half Ironman race not too far from here that went really well. And so hopefully my health lasts for another year at least. And this time next year, I'll hopefully be really sore and really tired because I'll be on my way home from Kona.
We will all be rooting for you. That's wonderful. And you're raising money for the children's
We call it Primary Promise. And it's the first enterprise-wide campaign that Intermountain has had. And the intent is to create a model healthcare system for kids that is both bricks and mortar as well as digital. It is distributed across the Intermountain West. We have assets for kids in, I guess it's 6 of the 8 Intermountain states and Alaska. Yeah. And we have this firm belief that people should get care as close to home as possible. Mm-hmm. And this campaign initially pegged around $500 million. We think it's going to probably end up being a bit more than that. Is designed to really create that model, which addresses physical health, so the usual stuff, heart disease, cancer, trauma, fetal medicine, and behavioral health, childhood trauma, transition from pediatric to adult chronic conditions. It's really exciting.
Yeah.
And if you can't raise money for this, we're in big trouble. But we have actually done very well so far.
You have made philanthropy a big part of your work and of the leadership team here. I was actually, Dave took me to your conference room where your ELT meets. And I don't know that I've ever seen a whiteboard as well organized as that whiteboard. So it was amazing.
Not much fun, but we're very well organized.
See, there you go. Yep. But one of the things that that makes you really progressive, I think, in the universe of healthcare philanthropy is that Dave sits on that ELT. He doesn't just report to you. He sits too as well in that group. What are the benefits of that from your perspective?
It's multifactorial. So the easiest explanation is the financial explanation, and it's probably the least important, to be quite honest. Mm-hmm. Dave raises a lot of money. And in order to generate the income that he generates, we'd have to do another, I don't know, it's like $3 billion worth of gross patient revenue. Yep. So it's a great investment. But it's much more than that. I think done right, philanthropy connects the organization to the community and connects the community to the organization, and allows us to take huge leaps above and beyond day-to-day operations. So we're very fortunate here. We run a great business in service to the community, and we try really hard to use philanthropy to do things that are going to dramatically change things for the communities that we invest in and that the communities invest in. And if that's not part of an executive team, I don't know what is.
What would I said it was a handful. It's probably 5 organizations that are that have that person sitting in that room. What would you say to your hospital CEO colleagues to convince them to put that person in that room? What should our membership say to their bosses in order to convince them of that?
Done well. People like Dave inject another voice into a conversation, and it's the voice of the people who care about the institution. And he does it extremely skillfully. Now, he's a great business person as well, and he makes contributions when we talk about clinical things and financial things and growth. But he also shares the voice of people who are really important. Now, one of the things I like best about Dave and the way we do philanthropy here is we do raise a lot of money. That's good. But every meeting we start, we have what we call an experience moment. And I'm sure many other systems do as well, where they connect to purpose with a story, sometimes good, sometimes bad, about how we've performed. And Dave will often share stories that about a donor who maybe gave us a couple $100, maybe less than that. Mm-hmm. Or somebody who was really in rough shape and had nothing, and we managed to help get them back on their feet one way or the other, medically, socially. Yeah. And that's a really important set of voices to hear. The rich people are all going to be fine. They're going to be fine. They're going to get good health care. Yep. They're going to go on great vacations. They're going to educate their kids. They're going to be fine. It's the marginal people that I think we really, and I don't mean marginal as human beings, I mean on the bubble in terms of are they going to be okay or not, and the people who fall below those lines, that we have the privilege of making a huge difference in their lives. And if we lose their voices, or if we never hear them in the first place, we're not going to do nearly as good a job as we're supposed to do. So people like Dave, I think, really connect us to purpose in that way.
Equity and access are also on that whiteboard in that room. and I know it's a firm commitment of yours, sort of building off of what you just said. Tell me about what you're doing there and why it's important.
Well, this is a lifelong passion of mine. Injustice makes me crazy, crazier than I am already. I mean, really, it makes me just go nuts.
Yeah.
And, you add to that what we learned from George Floyd's murder and other atrocities that came to light.
Yeah.
And we have to do something about this.
Yeah.
And the beauty of it is it's not political. It shouldn't be political. Yeah. So I don't care what political party you belong to, what part of the country you live in. Nobody wants Black people to die at 2 or 3 times the rate of white people in the course of a pandemic.
Yeah.
Nobody does. Nobody thinks it's okay for Black babies to die more frequently in newborn ICUs than white babies, unless they're cared for by a Black physician. And then they do, which is a fascinating thing.
Yes.
So it's clear that there are just things we need to change.
Yeah.
And it's been extraordinarily exciting to take this lifelong interest in addressing injustice and morphing our great organization to begin to address these things in completely in a divided and divisive and angry time, to unify people around doing good things for folks who don't look like them. Yeah. And I think it's been powerful.
You mentioned the statistics around having clinicians of color be in the hospitals. Is that something that you've been through med school, you've been through a residency program, you know all about all of this? How do we change that? How do we?
You got to work on the pipeline. You absolutely have to work on the pipeline. Only about 2% of physicians are Black, so there are some real issues, and we've made enormous strides in terms of male-female balance. Mm-hmm. We've actually got a lot of people with different socioeconomic backgrounds. We have other sorts of diversity. Some of the color and ethnicity issues, we've got a lot of work, as does the rest of the nation. Yeah. But unless you can actually talk about this stuff like straight up, you can never fix it. So if we just walk around pretending like everything's okay, and if people just go, oh, the pipeline's tough, so we're just going to throw up our hands and nothing's ever going to happen. And so we are just addressing things in a very Intermountain way. We've got goals, and we've got projects. And just last night I was at an event, and Ryan Smith, who owns the Jazz and founded Qualtrics, was there. And last year they did something really interesting. For every Jazz game that was won, they gave a full college scholarship to a person of color. Yeah. And what I said to Ryan is, how about if we offer them a job on the back end of that college experience? Yep. So for me, from a business standpoint, this is a pipeline of bright young people who are going to be well educated, who are going to look different and think different and will enrich us in that way. But also there's a social good there as well. Yeah. And there's a business imperative that it's the right thing to do. And so I said to him, let us do that retroactively for the people you awarded the scholarships to last year. And then together, let's go forward. And I think we'll announce that in the next week or two.
That's exciting.
Yeah, super fun.
We're seeing it even within the ranks of philanthropy professionals. There are a lot of donors from a lot of diverse backgrounds, and philanthropy professionals tend to be pretty homogenous. And so we're having similar conversations around, what do you do with the pipeline? Because that is the real issue. And reaching out to HBCUs and thinking about sororities and fraternities and sort of that level of outreach in order to bring people into
I think that sounds amazing. Let me ask you a question. Are there folks that you're tapping into from a lot less privileged backgrounds? So, I mean, some of this is skin color, some of it's language. A lot of it is just pure economics. Yeah. We see this a lot in our rural, poor white people here in the Intermountain West. They have as many cards stacked against them in the deck as anybody you'll meet. And I think it's really important to get people who can speak the language of those people and hopefully maybe came from that background to be the folks who are raising money and being leaders. Are you addressing that or thinking about it?
We are looking at ways to have people think of philanthropy as a profession instead of sort of falling into it. When you talk to most people who are in philanthropy, they will say, I fell into this job and I discovered I loved it because it's mission driven and it's focused on all of these things. And so I really wanted to stay in this, but I didn't wake up at 10 years old and say, man, I want to go raise money. That's my job. So a lot of what we need to do is explain to especially young people who care a lot about social justice and care a lot about community health. It's amazing.
Yeah.
And being a fundraiser is actually completely beautifully tied in with that natural instinct because we're all about the missions of the organization that we're raising money for.
I really like that.
So so that's the goal, is to bring that message.
I think you're
out.
right. Educating those folks when they're young and actually showing them a path and maybe mentoring them is really important. My wife came from a very modest background, extremely modest background. She's a physician.
Yeah.
She was at the University of Virginia Medical School and almost ready to graduate before she realized you had to do a residency after medical school.
Yeah.
It was like a rude awakening.
Yeah.
But there was nothing in her family's background that would have prepared her for that.
Yeah.
She didn't know anybody who was a doctor except the doctor she went. And we both believe, and it sounds like you believe as well, that it's really important to grab these folks from really interesting backgrounds early and just to show them how it works, because it's really a huge advantage for you to be able to tell your son how the college admissions process works.
That's exactly right.
What if you had never been to college?
That's right.
What if you pushed a broom, right? And you love him just as much and you want just as much for him and for his future, but you don't know how to guide him.
Yeah.
So we can help, I think.
Yeah. The other thing we've talked a lot about, and I'm curious to hear how you do this here, is there's a pipeline, of course, that's a question, and how do you build the pipeline? But then once you do have people who have come from backgrounds that are different than the traditional clinical background or the traditional philanthropy background, there is a lot of work that needs to be done around mentorship and support. I had someone say to me that they struggled a little bit with the volunteer time that they would like to be giving to AHP because they felt like, as a person of color, they needed to work twice as hard in order to sort of justify their role. Do you have programs that are mentoring people here?
Yes, I think we do it really well. It's funny, a lot of healthcare leadership development has ceased during or been put on hold in the pandemic, and we've actually doubled down.
Good for you.
If you're not going to invest in your leaders and your people, what are you going to invest in? I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
So no, I think we do it pretty well. We're always looking to learn and do more, but this building is actually the nexus of, especially before we went tele on a lot of things, but sort of our center of gravity in terms of leadership development.
Yeah. It's a beautiful building, too.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
thanks
absolutely.
to Dave and
Flood.
his team for helping us with this. Yeah.
So I saw you at Becker's several years ago, pre-pandemic. You and Michael Dowling were interviewed by Scott Becker, and you said, we have got to invest in the future and in innovative new ideas in order to make sure that we're financially stable 10 years from now. And if we don't do it now, we're not going to be okay on the other side. What investments were the ones that mattered the most, especially as you think about the last year and a half and sort of the upheaval?
We've been lucky and good.
That's a good place to be.
Pretty good combination, right? So we made the pivot towards value-based care. When I arrived, we had a really good intellectual orientation towards it, and credit to my predecessor. That's very hard to do. Yeah. The board was ready for it. I think a lot of the leadership and clinicians were mostly ready for it, but we hadn't actually invested in like changing comp models and getting the alignment correct. And we actually hadn't contractually moved to a place where a lot of care was at risk. Yeah. And boy, has that now we're about 50%, which is extraordinary. I think
it is.
Kaiser's the only folks who are actually higher than that, who are of substantial size. Mm-hmm. And it's been wildly successful.
Yeah.
So everything that goes along with that, digital, hospital at home, remote monitoring, the ability to do clinical trials across vast geography, not just in an academic medical center. All those things we invested in, and they've all paid off. And the pandemic has catalyzed that change in a very powerful and positive way. And we're trying really hard to not ever go back, because a lot of the volume-driven systems are quick going back to doing as much stuff in the hospital as possible. On the contrary, I think it was just 2 weeks ago, we announced the formation of Teleca, which is a low-cost imaging company that we will be rolling out across our geography and beyond. So all of the institutions that are listening who are relying on hospital radiology for revenue, watch out, because Teleca is coming.
You're on notice.
They are on notice. But look, it's absolutely wrong for somebody to get an outpatient MRI when they're stable, they don't need to be in a hospital, and get charged. In some places it's $3,000, right? We're going to charge $550 with the read, and the reads are going to be good. The quality is going to be great, because employers have shifted lots of healthcare costs to the people, to the regular folks who work really hard, and that $550 is going to be a lot less painful coming out of their pocket before their deductible is met than the $3,000.
Yeah.
So
right.
That's the kind of investments we're making. It's been really hard.
Yeah.
But it's been really good.
Well, and a smart move when you think about the impact of a lot of the elimination, for a while anyway, of elective procedures and everything else. If you're able to be pulling revenue from other places, you're not as reliant on that sort of reimbursement.
So for those of us that have, and there are not many of us, as you know, that have large at-risk populations, we have that chunk of change, right? And how do we deploy it? We can deploy it in all kinds of interesting and creative ways, as long as we get good outcomes, which we do. Yeah. And it just really smoothed things out a lot. What I think is interesting is how little will I'm seeing from most healthcare CEOs, even after they've learned this bitter lesson, and the government came and bailed them out with all kinds of CARES Act money, to not see the writing on the wall that this is coming.
Yeah. So you are known to take sometimes controversial stances.
Impatient.
And you're also known to lead into areas that you really believe in. Yeah. What should healthcare and all of your healthcare CEO colleagues be focused on, having learned the lesson of the pandemic? What's next? What should the next frontier be for healthcare?
So it's care where, when, and how people want it. Care that people can actually afford. The fact that
which is pretty controversial, really. I mean, it's not controversial, but it's pretty amazing.
How the hell can a healthcare CEO not care about the fact that 1 out of 3 to 1 out of 4 people in our country are rationing healthcare?
It's horrifying.
It's arrogant and horrifying, and it is actually, in my mind, they're not living up to the responsibility they've been given. Yeah. And I'll tell you, some of your colleagues are helping build cathedrals to medicine with poor people's money. And that's wrong.
I have loved the move by many organizations to start fundraising for community health. And
Bingo.
That's to me, where it goes.
So, look, I was very direct with you.
Yeah.
We know that philanthropic funds are really important to seed a project.
Absolutely.
The maintenance of one of those cathedrals gets paid for with Medicaid money, Medicare money, a teacher's co-pays. People should really be ashamed of themselves for building those places.
Well, and the whole system of reimbursement is sideways. I mean, the whole thing
100% agree.
There should not, for example, be need for philanthropic dollars in the healthcare universe.
I agree with you. And that's why we try really hard here to reserve that money for leaps that are going to benefit the community. So what should this look like? It should be where, when, and how people want it. They should be able to afford it. It should be as close to home as possible. The idea that meccas exist that draw people to them is super old fashioned, and
Yeah.
organizations that are relying on that for a lot of their margin are going to get their lunch eaten.
And did in the last 18 months
did.
because nobody traveled. So
Isn't it interesting that so many of them are just trying to go back to the way things
yeah,
were?
it is.
Fool me
is.
once, right? Now we're into the fool me
Yep.
twice place, where
Yep.
I think it's really very interesting. I think it will be a hybrid digital bricks and mortar world.
Mm-hmm.
So for somebody like me, I had my CAR T therapy. It was offered in 2 places in the world when I was getting it. I had to go someplace, or else I was going to die. And I should have been, if I didn't get that, I would have been dead a year ago. Increasingly, this is going to be offered mostly at home.
Yeah.
You know, people will come into the hospital for that scary part where you're a week into CAR T and you predictably get cytokine release syndrome.
Yeah.
So I think that's what we have to be thinking about. How do we keep this as light and human as possible? And reserve the fancy stuff for the moments when it's really, really needed. Because we all have them, right?
Yeah.
So that's what it should look like.
All right. So last question, last word. You are speaking to 500 or so healthcare fundraisers. What would you say to them to inspire them? This has been a hard year for them too.
I bet it has.
And they have been, they haven't spent a lot of time stepping back and sort of celebrating the successes that they have felt in the last 18 months. What would you say to them?
I really think look, as you know, I believe in philanthropy because of the relationships it builds. I would ask them to change the world. Really, they have the potential to connect people to their organizations in ways that will profoundly change the lives of their neighbors for generations to come. And what a privilege that is.
Yeah.
You know, there are a lot of people who are forced to make a living doing things that it's really difficult to make the connection to the higher purpose. Yeah. I can't think of a profession that is as directly connected to changing that future as what your colleagues do. And I respect them a lot. And the other thing I'd say is they should use their moral compass, which, having worked with your colleagues in a number of places around the world now, is really it's really well developed. These are amazing people who you're representing here today. I would really say to them, use their influence and their moral compass to help drive their institutions in the right direction.
It's a lot. And it's a really good challenge for all of the folks at
I think
AHB.
they're up to it.
I do too. Thank you.
You're welcome.
This has been really fun. I really appreciate your time.
It's absolutely my pleasure. And you're not allowed to leave Utah because we've enjoyed having you here so much.
My husband would be thrilled because he actually lived here for several years, so he's been dying to come back, but not for a while.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Really appreciate it.
You bet.
I hope you found that conversation as fascinating and thought-provoking as I did. Marc's challenge to us all to really make impact is so inspiring.